Hey guys, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to write an automation to create pivot table using Excel VBA. And before we start, let me just give you a quick demo on the macro we'll be creating. So here on the view, and if I go to macros, so right now I only have one macro is available, and the macro is create pivot table. And if I click on run, so noticing that right now I only have one worksheet that is available, and the worksheet is the data worksheet that contains the raw data. And if I click on run, the macro will automatically generate a brand new fresh pivot table from scratch. And the next thing is if someone delete the pivot table sheet by accident, so here let me delete the worksheet. You don't have to worry about manually creating the same pivot table again. Here you can simply just go to macros and run the macro, and that will basically create the same pivot table from scratch. By the way, you can download this exercise file from the link in the video description. Alright, now let's go ahead and create this automation from scratch. Alright, so here's a blank Excel workbook, and here I only have the data tab. Let's just take a quick look at the data set real quick. So from the data set, we have retailer country column, order method type column, retailer type, product line, product type, and so on. And we'll be using the retailer type. So let me highlight the column. And the other method type, as well as product line. Here's another column that we'll be using. Year and revenue. And as well as quantity. So these 6 columns will be the columns that we'll be using to create our pivot table report. Now let's go ahead and open the VBA window by using the shortcut Alt F11. And let's go ahead and insert a new module. And let me close this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my variables. Here I'm going to create a workbook variable, and as well as a worksheet data variable. So this worksheet data variable is going to host the data worksheet object, and as well as a worksheet that we'll be using to store the pivot table. And let's create our first subroutine here. So I'm going to call this subroutine create pivot table. And here I'm going to declare my variables. And it's going to host the data range for the data sets. And I also need to create a pivot cache object variable. So the pivot cache is kind of works like a memory storage. So basically it's going to store your data. That way later on when you want to create multiple pivot tables, you can use the pivot cache to retrieve the data. And here I also need to create a pivot table variable. Right, so now these are the variables that we need. And now let's go ahead and create our objects. So here's a typo, should be WB, that's workbook. And this is going to be releasing the object memories. And I also need to create a worksheet data object. And I'm going to assign the data tab to the WS data variable. And I'm going to create a subroutine to delete the pivot table tab. So here, and here I'm going to create a private subroutine. And I'm going to call this subroutine delete PT sheet. And the delete PT sheet subroutine is going to delete the pivot table tab. So we need to turn off the display alert, so that way that when you try to delete the worksheets, it doesn't display the notification. I'm going to takes the pivot table sheet. So we don't have the pivot table sheet yet, but when you create a pivot table, the pivot table is going to be placed on the pivot table worksheet. Delete. Okay. Right, and that's for the delete underscore pt underscore sheet subroutine. Now let's continue. Actually, let me do a compile. Just make sure that there's no typo in this thing. Here I have a typo, and so here should be WB, not WS. Let me compile again. Right, so everything looks good so far. Now let's continue. And here within my WS data variable, and I need to get the last row first, because I want to make the automation dynamic, meaning that no matter how many records or rows that you have, this macro is always going to use the entire data set. So whether if you have 2 records or 1,000 records or 1,000,000 records, the automation will work regardlessly. So here, let me get the last row number based on column A. And as well as the last column index. Alright, so here I'm going to set my data range. And it's going to be from the first row, first column, all the way to last row and the last column. And here I'm going to take the data range object, and I'm going to set that to nothing at the end. Now let's create the pivot table worksheet. So here we want to add a brand new worksheet, and we're going to name the worksheet pivot table. And here we'll create the PD cache object. So from the WB variable, and which is this workbook, and you're going to store the cache inside the Excel workbook. And want to use the create method. So here our parameter will be Excel database, and that just means that you're using Excel dataset as the database source. You can also choose different type of table source. For example, like external, and that means that you can connect your data source to a different database like Microsoft Access, SQL Server, MySQL, and even Salesforce, I believe. And I've never tried pivot table and the scenario and the consolidation data source, so you might have to give those a try or experiment those table source type on your own. Now let me choose Excel database table source type, and our source data will be data range object variable. So from here, right here. And for the version, it's optional, but if you want, you can give a version name. But for this video, I want to make everything as simple as possible, so I'm going to leave that parameter blank. Right, and so here let me set the WSPT object as nothing, and the cache as well. Let me just do a compile real quick. Right, now we have the pivot table cache. Now we can go ahead and create our pivot table. So here to create a pivot table, want to use the PT cache object, and from the PT cache object, there's a method called create pivot table. From the PT cache object, you can actually do a couple other things like creating a pivot chart, as well as I think the other items are mostly property values. Those things will give you the pivot table information. But here you can, from the PD cache, you can refresh, create pivot table, pivot charts. Let's see. And reset timer, meaning that you can set the refresh at a certain time. And save as ODC. That I've never used that before. And I think that's pretty much it. Right, so now let me choose create pivot table. And here we're going to place our table destination to the pivot table worksheet. And we're going to insert the pivot table at cell reference. Let's do B5. And we'll name the pivot table PT sales summary. Now let's run the macro real quick to see what we have so far. So if we press F5, and as you can see that the macro creates a brand new worksheet and name the worksheet pivot table. And here it creates a brand new kind of like a pivot table designer. Right, so now let's continue. So let me go back to the VBA window. And here we're going to do our configuration. We need to specify what fields that we'll be using and what column will go where. One of my suggestions when you write your pivot table automation is figure out what you want. Now, a lot of time I will manually create the pivot table by hand and to see the final result first. And if I like the final result, then I'm going to use that as like a template, and I will write my automation accordingly based on that template design. And here I already know my design, so I can basically write the VBA code and to give me the design that I want. So from the PT object, and here's going to be the pivot table layout setting. And we can set the row axis layout. We can set the table layout as compact, outline, or tableau. And I like to set my pivot table as like a regular table. So I'm going to choose the last option. And for the next setting, not this one. Should be, it is right. Column grand. Okay. And this setting is for if you want to display the grand total on the column level. So I'm going to set this to false. And for the row grand, and that's going to be the setting if you want to display the grand total on the row level. And I'll set that to false as well. And for the table style, so in Excel, there's many different type of styles that you can apply to the pivot table. So let me go back. If you go to design and under the pivot table styles, here you can choose different type of pivot table. So if you just hover your mouse and you see that there's a tiny label that is displaying the style name. And here I want to use the pivot table style median 9. And this setting code has auto format. So this setting is basically when you refresh your pivot table and you want to reformat your pivot table, like resizing the columns, reformat the numbers and so on. So I usually like to set this to false. And next, there's a subtotal location property. And that just means that you want to display your subtotal at the top or the bottom. So here we have two options, Excel at bottom or Excel at top. And I'm going to choose Excel at top. I'm going to display my subtotal at the top. Right, now that's for the settings. Now we need to create our filter. So let me move this to the middle so you can consider the pivot table designer option better. So if you notice that we have 4 different sessions: the filter session, column session, row session, and value session. And I'll show you how to map the fields in those 4 sessions individually. So the first one will be the filter session. Let's say I want to use retailer countries as my filters. And to do that, so here I'm going to use the width statement. And from the pivot fields, here you want to provide the column name, and the column name is retailer country. And I'll set the orientation to Excel page field. And the orientation basically indicating that where this column mapping goes to. Excel page fields meaning that this column right here will go into the filter section. And now if I just plus F5 to run the macro, oops, there's a typo. Oh, so I forgot one thing. So I forgot to call the delete PT sheet macro. And so I'll put this right here. Because worksheet name has to be unique, and that's why when I try to run the macro, and Excel VBA is giving me the error. Now if I try to run the macro again, and here I got another error. So let me just double check. Oh, I know why. So here's the typo. It should be pivot fields, not page fields. Alright, now let me try again. Sorry guys. Okay, now this time it works. So here's our pivot table sheet. And let me delete this extra worksheet real quick. So here's our filter right here. And here I want to take one extra step. I want to enable multiple page item. So here, enable multiple page items. And I'll set it to 2. Now if I run this, and so the enable multiple page items property basically enable this select multiple items setting. If you set the enable multiple page items property to false, then that means that you can only select one item at a time. So here, let me put that back. Now that's for the pivot table filters. Now we're going to move on to the row area. And here we're going to, let me add a comment real quick. And I'll show you how to add multiple layers to the row section. So this is going to be layer 1. And this here is going to be row section. And this will be layer 2. And this will be filters. So to add the fields to the row section, in here we'll use the pivot fields property, and here we'll provide the column name, and I want to use the order method type column. And from the order method type pivot field, and I'm going to set the orientation to XL row field. So the orientation property is almost always going to be the first thing that I specify in my automation. And here I'll set my row section or layer position. So this will be position 1. And the position property is going to be used to determine your layer. So for row section layer 2, the position value will be 2. And here I'll set the layout blank line property to false. Oops, there's a typo. Alright, the layout blank line property is used if you have a blank row, and if you set this property to 2, then we're taking the blank row as like a valid record, and the macro will take the blank row into the calculation consideration. Alright, so the next 4 settings are optional. You don't necessarily need to have these 4 settings in your code, but I like to show you these 4 settings just because I think they are pretty useful. And the first one will be subtotals. Like the setting name suggests, do you want to insert the subtotal? And here I'll set the subtotals value to false. And the next setting will be the layout form. You can choose if you want to use the Tableau layout. here, Excel tabulr. And if you want, you can also use the Excel outline layout. And these are the two layout options. And here, you also have the layout compact row setting. And you can set that to true or false. Actually, I made a mistake, so it should be only 3 settings, not 4. Actually, let me change the subtotal to 2, so I'll show you what the pivot table looks like when I run this. Actually, let me run this macro quick, so to see what the pivot table looks like right now. So here we have the filter, and we have the row label from order method type. And right, so far so good. Now we're almost done with the VBA. Now let's create the second layer for the row session. So for the second layer, I'm going to use the product line fill. And I will just supply the minimal settings. So orientation, I'll set that to Excel row fill. And I'll set the layout blank line to 2. And these are the 2 only settings that I want to specify. Now that's for the row session, and for the column session, it's almost very similar. So here I want to use the year column as my column session field. Actually, I forgot the position number. And here for the orientation, I'm going to set the orientation as Excel column field. And the Excel column field orientation is going to map the year column to the column right here, column session. And I'll set the position to 1. And that's for the column session. Alright, so now we're almost done. So here I want to map my columns to the values session. And the values session basically just is doing the calculation, the aggregation. And here I'll take the revenue column. Actually, I'll copy these and I'll make a duplicate field. And here for the orientation, I'll set this to Excel data field. And I'll do the same for the other revenue field. And for the position, it's going to be 1. And here for the position, it's going to be 1 as well. So for this one, I'm going to set the function to Excel sum. And so I'm going to sum all the values for this revenue pivot table field. And for this one, I want to do a count. So actually, I'll do a count is fine. Actually, if it's revenue, then I'll do an average. And there are other functions that you can use, but average and sum and counts are the most popular and widely used pivot table values function. I'm going to create another values mapping. And for this one, I'll take the quantity column. And the orientation is going to be Excel data field. And position is going to be 1 as well. And for the function, I'm going to use the counts function. So for pivot table, the function setting name will be Excel count. And if you want, you can format the number as well. So here I want to format my counts as 0 decimal. And I'll name the field caption will be QTY. I'm also going to set the formatting to other revenues field as well. And I'll name the caption revenue. And this will be average. And the caption will be revenue total. Alright guys, so this is everything for the automation. I mean, this is all the code that you need to create the pivot table that I just showed you. Now let me clean the code real quick. And let me just make sure that I'm not missing anything. Here I have an extra line here. And let me do a debug and compile. Seems like there's a typo somewhere. And let me just do a quick check to see. Oh, I know why. So here I should indent this. Okay. Alright, let me do another compile. Okay, now this time there's no error or anything, so that means that our code should be good to go. So let me close this window. Now I'm going to delete this pivot table worksheet. And now if I go to view and macros, and if I run the create pivot table macro, oops, it doesn't like caption. Oh, here's a typo. All right, still caption. Okay, let me try again. So if I go back, again, so this should be pivot fields. Right, and I think that should be it. So let me try again. Let me go to macros and run the macro. And this time everything looks great. So this is the final the final output that generated from the create pivot table macro. And we can also do additional formatting, you know, like expand the column words and to make the numbers stretch out a little bit more. And actually, let me do that. So it will be really quick. So should go into WSPT and worksheet. Now if I run the macros again, and here the macro will auto fit the columns for us. So this is everything I want to show you guys in this video. Basically how to write Excel automation to generate a pivot table from scratch. I know the video is a little bit long. I'm trying to provide as much information as possible when you try to writing a pivot table automation. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or leave a comment below. I'll try my best to answer all the questions that I get. Alright, thanks for watching and see you guys on the next video.